It's rather like giving a lecture in the Odeon cinema somewhere, isn't it? Beautiful hall. Is that sound all right? Comfortable? Because you're going to be listening to it to rather a long time. All right to everybody? Please raise your hand if it's not. Good. Well, this is really the beginning of a new series of NSUK Gosho lectures. As you'll remember, the last series was entirely devoted to the Risho Ankoku-ron. And it took us many lectures to go right the way through it. But this new series will be of a different nature. That is to say, I'll be taking each time one of the shorter Gosho from Volume 2 of the major writings of Nichiren Daishonin. And gradually, I hope we'll master these Goshos in this particular volume during the coming year. There will be a new volume, Volume 3 of the major writings of Nichiren Daishonin, coming out next year. So I'm anxious that we should be able to go through these. As a first step, of course, one will go through them many times in the future, but to make a first reading of it, if you like, during this coming year before the new volume comes out. So I've taken, as you'll see from the papers you've got, as the first lecture, what is in fact the last Gosho in Volume 2, that is to say, the proof of the Lotus Sutra. So this Gosho was sent by hand of Nikko Shonin, the second high priest, although he wasn't at that time, of course, to a man whose name is famous to many of you, Nanjo Tokimitsu. The Gosho was actually written on the 28th of February, 1282. So in this Gosho, you'll find in the text, when we read it through, that he uses different names for Nanjo Tokimitsu. He calls him, in fact, Ueno Shichiro Jiro. Ueno Shichiro Jiro. So he calls him Ueno because Nanjo Tokimitsu was the feudal lord of an area called Ueno, U-E-N-O, which was a very large area including the foothills or the lower slopes of Mount Fuji. And it was an extremely big area, we're told. So that is why the word Ueno comes in. Shichiro Jiro are two other names which Nanjo Tokimitsu was given. So in a way, in saying Ueno Shichiro Jiro, he's saying Shichiro Jiro, Lord of Ueno. Nanjo Tokimitsu was born in 1259. So that means he was just on 24 years old only when he received this Gosho. So this is worth thinking about, I feel, all the way through this Gosho, especially if you're a member of the Young Men's Division. Ueno was 24 years old, and he'd already done great activities on Nichiren Daishonin's behalf. In fact, sometime before this Gosho was written, Nichiren Daishonin had named Nanjo Tokimitsu the sage of Ueno, the sage of Ueno. So although he was but 24 years old, he must have been an extremely wise young man. So the reason, I think, he was named the sage of Ueno is, first of all, how he expressed, if you like, his stability and wisdom was that his father died when he was very young, the previous Lord Ueno, who also received Gosho from Nichiren Daishonin. But his father died when Nanjo was extremely young. And at a very early age, reckoned to be around about 15 to 16, he began to shoulder the responsibility for running the family and also the estates and the land. So he took this responsibility, it seems, from all that Nichiren Daishonin wrote to him, extremely courageously and willingly, at such an age. It's hard for us to even imagine, isn't it? But this is what he did. So he must have been a very outstanding young man. Nanjo Tokimitsu had practiced to the Gohonzon since he was a child. Of course, for sure, in taking on those responsibilities at such an early age, he really based them on his daimoku to the Gohonzon. He also, because of his social position as lord of the area, became the leading lay believer in the area of Mount Fuji itself. So he was a leader in every respect, both in society and from the point of view of faith, with great responsibilities. Because he was a lord and therefore should have been bowing to the central government, and since the central authorities were so much against Nichiren Daishonin, he went through a period of incredible persecution because of his loyalty to the Daishonin. He was very much persecuted by the government. They confiscated his land. They took away many of his possessions, even his horses, which were so necessary for a young a nobleman to get about and to preserve his dignity. It was a real disgrace to have your horses removed. He lost his servants. He had very little money. And added to that, although he was only 24, he'd already produced a family of several children. I don't know how many. So he was active in all sorts of ways. During the time of the Atsuhara persecution, when, as you know, 3 of the Nichiren Daishonin's followers were executed for their faith, Lord Ueno, Nanjo Tokimitsu, took charge of all the believers in that area where the Atsuhara persecution took place, and through his inspiration and courage managed to lead them and guide them through those quite incredible, difficult times. So despite this, despite all that he went through, because he refused to give up his faith in Nichiren Daishonin and in the teachings of Nichiren Daishonin, despite the fact that he was poor, we know from the many Gosho that were written to him that Nanjo consistently, together with his wife, made offerings to Nichiren Daishonin. So many Gosho, Nichiren Daishonin wrote in gratitude for food, writing materials, and other essential needs which Nanjo Tokimitsu sent to him. This was amazing, considering the situation that his family were in and his poverty at that time. And I really feel that Nanjo represents absolutely the spirit of making contribution to the Buddha, the spirit of making contribution to the Gohonzon, or Gokuyo, as it's known in Japanese. So he and his wife together always agreed mutually that they should support the Daishonin as best they could with what little resources they had. In doing this, of course, there can be no doubt that their feeling was that above all things, Nichiren Daishonin must live, must be able to continue to write and give guidance and fulfill his mission before he died. So this is a real example for all of us. We should give what we can, however small, so that, in our case, NSUK, which is the Buddha's organization, so far as the United Kingdom is concerned, can fulfill its mission, that it can be stable financially, that it can grow and produce the buildings necessary to cope with our needs in the future, that it can provide study materials, books, films, and all sorts of other things in the future. It may be a strange point to mention in a Gosho lecture, and we don't usually talk about money, but only 1/3 of the members of NSUK actually support NSUK. And this concerns me, not so much from the financial point of view, because we always manage somehow, but it worries me because it means that 2/3 of the members of NSUK are not receiving the benefit from the cause of making contribution. And this, of course, makes me sad. So I'd like you to bear in mind Nanjo, Tokimitsu, and Tokimitsu's spirit, and really reflect on this point, and indeed tell your friends about it. So as you know, Renge of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is cause and effect. If one gives in any way to the Gohonzon or to the Buddha, then of course, inevitably, through cause and effect, the reward will come back to you in abundance. So this is what I'm sure most of you would like to see happening. And this is one of the ways that we can build good fortune. The other way, of course, is to give what is known as our bodies. That is to say, to give our lives to doing activities, study, shakubuku, and so on, the actual practice itself. So, in a way, this letter is an example of the cause and effect of contribution. Just a few months before Nichiren Daishonin wrote this letter, he had written to someone else saying, "Due to my decline in health, I have refrained from replying to those who sent me letters." Remember that this letter, which was written in 1282, in February, was just a few months before Nichiren Daishonin died. And a few months before that, all the sufferings he'd been through began to tell in his physical being. And as I've just quoted from his writings, he had to give up writing letters. Yet, he wrote to Nanjo Tokimitsu, this Gosho, because all through his young life, Nanjo had really made contribution to him. Nanjo was so important, and therefore, as a disciple to him. So through cause and effect, despite his own sickness, Nichiren Daishonin wrote this letter to Nanjo. And the reason, Nanjo was in trouble. And the trouble was that he had become desperately ill. Because when Nichiren Daishonin heard this, he on no account, in his turn, wanted Nanjo Tokimitsu not to fulfill his mission in life and live a full span of life in order to do so. He wrote this letter to him to encourage and inspire him and protect him. And through this letter and the inspiration it gave to Nanjo, Nanjo galvanized his spirit and his faith and became better. And in fact, lived on to be 73 years old. His mission was incredibly important because in due course of time, as many of you know, after Nichiren Daishonin died, Nanjo then gave the land for the head temple Taisekeji. So to this very day, the land on which the head temple stands was the gift of this remarkable young man. And of course, that also emphasizes the incredible benefit, further, of making contribution. Millions of daimoku are chanted at the head temple Taisekeji every day. Everyone who goes there knows or discovers while they're there that the land on which the head temple was built was given by Nanjo Tokimitsu. Therefore, inevitably, their daimoku includes his life. So, of course, we don't know where Nanjo Tokimitsu is now. But what is for sure, I'm sure you will agree, is that his life is happy and that he has certainly attained Buddhahood. So this is the great benefit of contribution which I wanted to emphasize. And of course that contribution need only be small. This is made quite clear in another Gosho where Shakyamuni Buddha talks about the little boy who was playing with a friend on the sand when Shakyamuni Buddha came towards him. And he so much respected Shakyamuni, yet he had nothing to give him, and he wanted to give him something with his whole heart. So he scooped up some sand and put it in a little can or something or other, and then gave that as his gift to Shakyamuni. So no matter how small, if your circumstances don't permit it, contribution to the Gohonzon or to the Buddha will always bring benefit. And the story, of course, goes on that the little boy with the mud pie eventually became the great King Ashoka in another lifetime. When I was in Holland with President Ikeda, Sensei as we call him, just a few days ago, he also was just talking quite casually over a meal about generosity. And he was saying, I've always tried to be generous, even though I had so little when I was young. And then he said how when he went in 1961 for the first time to Europe and visited the city of Vienna, in the hotel they were very well looked after by a waiter. And at the end of their stay in this hotel, Sensei wanted to do something to really express his gratitude for this. So he gave him a very generous tip, although he said the Soka Gakkai was so poor in those days. He gave him a great tip, and the man, of course, was delighted. When Sensei went back to Vienna in 1981, 2 years ago, he was overjoyed to discover that this waiter was now the manager of the hotel. And as manager of the hotel, of course, he couldn't do enough for Sensei and his party and help them in every possible way that he could. And Sensei ended by saying, "It always comes back," he said, unfailingly, through the law of cause and effect. So let's really bear this in mind and help others to understand it. We don't ask for money, we don't call for contributions, because in Buddhism, to give must be from the heart if it's to be a good cause. It must be spontaneous. It must be one's own wish. On the other hand, it's important that everyone's aware of this fact and that they can then challenge it in their own lives and chant Daimoku about it and reach their own conclusions. Right, I think now we're ready to begin to read the Gosho. Thank you, John.
This is in Volume 2, page 309, if you have Volume 2 of the major writings. Otherwise, the little sheet of paper. The proof of the Lotus Sutra. Nichiren, the votary of the Lotus Sutra. A person who, during the evil age of the latter day of the law, believes in the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, just as they are set forth in the Sutra, how does the mirror of the Lotus Sutra portray him? Shakyamuni Buddha has left us words from his golden mouth, revealing that such a person has already served tens of billions of Buddhas in his past existences. But common mortals in the latter day might well doubt the words spoken by one Buddha only. With this thought in mind, Taho Buddha expressly came all the way from his world of treasure purity, many lands to the east. Facing Shakyamuni Buddha, he gave his words of testimony saying, "All that you have expounded is the truth." If this is so, then there can be no room for doubt about the matter. Nevertheless, the Buddha may have felt that common mortals in the latter day of the law would still be skeptical. Hence, he summoned all the Buddhas throughout the 10 directions to come and join him in the magnificent act of extending their long, broad tongues, which had told nothing but the truth for countless aeons, until they projected into the sky as high as Mount Sumeru. Since this is the case, when a common mortal in the latter day believes in even 1 or 2 words of the Lotus Sutra, he is embracing the teaching to which all the Buddhas in the 10 directions have given credence. I wonder what good karma I created in the past to have been born as such a person, and I am filled with joy. Shakyamuni's words, which I have mentioned above, indicate that the blessings that come from having served tens of billions of Buddhas are so great that even though one may have believed in teachings other than the Lotus Sutra, and as a result of this slander been born poor and lowly, he is still able to believe in this sutra during this lifetime. Miao Lo states, "One who falls to the ground rises by pushing himself up from the ground. Those who slander the Lotus Sutra will fall to the ground of the 3 evil paths, humanity or heaven, yet through the help of the Lotus Sutra, they will in the end attain Buddhahood." Now since you, Ueno Shichiro Jiro, are a common mortal in the latter day of the law, and were born into a warrior family, you should by rights be called an evil man, and yet your heart is that of a good man. I say this for a reason. Everyone, from the ruler on down to the common people, refuses to take faith in my teachings. They inflict harm on the few who do embrace them, heavily taxing or confiscating their estates and fields, or even, in some cases, putting them to death. So it is a difficult thing to believe in my teachings, and yet both your mother and your deceased father dared to accept them. Now you have succeeded your father as his heir, and without any persuasion from others, you too have wholeheartedly embraced these teachings. Many people, both high and low in rank, have reprimanded or threatened you, but you have refused to give up your faith. Now that you appear certain to attain Buddhahood, the devil of the 6th heaven and other demons are trying to use this illness to intimidate you. But remember that life in this world is limited. Never allow yourself to be intimidated. And as for you demons, will you cause this disciple of mine to suffer and swallow a sword point first, or embrace a raging fire, or become the arch enemy of all the Buddhas throughout the universe and in the 3 existences of life? How terrible this will be for you. Now, will you cure this man's illness immediately, and hereafter give him your protection instead, in this way escaping from the grievous sufferings that are the lot of demons? Or do you prefer to have your heads broken into 7 pieces, and after your death to fall into the hell of incessant suffering? Bear what I say in mind, and do not forget, if you ignore my words, you will regret it later. The 28th day, the 2nd month, in the 5th year of Koan, 1282.
Thank you. So this Gosho, apart from the first point which I mentioned concerning contribution, which relates to Nanjo Tokimitsu, brings out 3 other main points. The first is that no matter how much slander we may have committed in the past, either in this life or in previous lifetimes, if we stop slandering and truly practice wholeheartedly to the Gohonzon, we will attain Buddhahood. This is the first point. No matter what may have happened in our past, we can overcome such causes by the great causes of embracing the Gohonzon, which is, of course, representative of the supreme dignity of life. And the second point is that at times we may have to undergo a test of faith. These tests of faith are important because through battling our way through such times, we become strong ourselves and our faith is cemented. So always such difficult times are followed by great benefit as long as we don't give in and run away. And the third point is the strong spirit of faith and practice with which illness should be attacked and overcome. So now I'll go back to the first passage and ask John to read it again.
A person who, during the evil age of the latter day of the law, believes in the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, just as they are set forth in the Sutra, how does the mirror of the Lotus Sutra portray him? Shakyamuni Buddha has left us words from his golden mouth, revealing that such a person has already served tens of billions of Buddhas in his past existences. But common mortals in the latter day might well doubt the words spoken by one Buddha only. With this thought in mind, Taho Buddha expressly came all the way from his world of treasure purity, many lands to the east. Facing Shakyamuni Buddha, he gave his words of testimony, saying, "All that you have expounded is the truth." If this is so, then there can be no room for doubt about the matter. Nevertheless, the Buddha may have felt that common mortals in the latter day of the law would still be skeptical. Hence, he summoned all the Buddhas throughout the 10 directions to come and join him in the magnificent act of extending their long, broad tongues, which had told nothing but the truth for countless aeons, until they projected into the sky as high as Mount Sumeru. Since this is the case, when a common mortal in the latter day believes in even 1 or 2 words of the Lotus Sutra, he is embracing the teaching to which all the Buddhas in the 10 directions have given credence.
Thank you. So this first passage, which John has just read, is the reason why the Gosho is titled The Proof of the Lotus Sutra. And without a doubt, Nichiren Daishonin's purpose in writing this first passage was to remind Nanjo Tokimitsu in his suffering of the profundity of Buddhism and the great hope that it gave him of attaining Buddhahood by explaining the deep meaning of both the practice and Nanjo Tokimitsu's position as a follower of the Buddhism which Nichiren Daishonin was teaching. So he begins by saying, a person who during the evil age of the latter day of the law believes in the teachings of the Lotus Sutra, just as they set forth in the Sutra, how does the mirror of the Lotus Sutra portray him? He's there, when he mentions a mirror, referring to the Gohonzon. What is it that you see when you look at the Gohonzon? So, of course, we know that what we see is the Buddha's life, the life of a human being in its highest state, or the state of Buddhahood. When we look at the Gohonzon, we see the Buddha's life in that high state. But we're also taught by Nichiren Daishonin that that can be exactly our life state. So really, these paragraphs are to remind Nanjo Tokimitsu of that fact. And then he refers to the treasure tower, or the ceremoniere, in the Lotus Sutra. Now, as you may know, Nichiren Daishonin used the ceremony in the air, as it's called, and the treasure tower, which took part in that ceremony, as a vehicle when he was inscribing the Gohonzon. In other words, there is a direct relationship between those characters on the Gohonzon and the way they are laid out and the ceremony in the air of the Lotus Sutra, when Shakyamuni Buddha explained his enlightenment as to life and how his enlightenment would be transmitted through the ages ahead. So, although on that Gohonzon, the enlightenment we see is the enlightenment of Nichiren Daishonin, and only Nichiren Daishonin revealed the way in which that enlightenment could be achieved, that is to say, through chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo to the Gohonzon. In fact, he is saying here that all the other Buddhas of the entire universe actually achieved enlightenment in the same way. That the only path to enlightenment is through Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and the Gohonzon. And all the Buddhas in the entire universe have reached enlightenment through fulfilling that practice. So he uses the treasure tower as a vehicle, and through doing so, he establishes, Nichiren Daishonin establishes that his Buddhism is in fact in the orthodox and direct flow of Buddhism down through 2,000 years from the time Shakyamuni taught to the time Nichiren Daishonin established the Gohonzon and declared Nam-myoho Renge Kyo himself. And then right at the end of that same passage that John read, he gives the answer to the question, how does the mirror of the Lotus Sutra portray him? He says, when a common mortal in the latter day believes in even one or two words of the Lotus Sutra, he is embracing the teaching to which all the Buddhas in the 10 directions have given credence. The answer is that through embracing the mirror of the Lotus Sutra or the Gohonzon, you can attain Buddhahood. Yes, you and me and all of us, every human being, if they like to make that effort and give it a try, you can attain Buddhahood just the same as Shakyamuni, Nichiren Daishonin himself, and all the Buddhas of the universe. So in this way, he was encouraging Nanjo Tokimitsu and reminding him of the greatness of what he was doing. So when Nichiren Daishonin talks in this passage about the Buddhas of the 10 directions, he is stating by that term that it really does include all the Buddhas of the universe. So the 10 directions are north, south, east, west, north, east, northwest, southeast, southwest, and up and down. 10 directions, which means the entirety of boundless space. So, of course, Buddhism doesn't confine life and Nam-myoho Renge Kyo just to this planet that we live on. That's a very narrow-minded point of view. And more people are beginning to have a fairly strong suspicion that there must be many other planets in this universe where life similar to human life may exist. And this is confirmed in Buddhism from the very moment it was taught in recorded history 3,000 years ago. In other words, there are Buddhas and there are Buddhas' lands throughout the boundless universe in enormous numbers. So, in other words, too, Buddhahood, he is saying to Nanjo Tokimitsu, is not unique. A Buddha is not some supreme, superhuman person. A Buddha is anybody who likes to make the effort to devote his life to Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So he goes on to say that those who believe in the Lotus Sutra, or as we would put it today, those who believe in the Gohonzon, have made the cause to find the Gohonzon in this lifetime. And that cause, he says, is that they have already served tens of billions of Buddhas in past existences. It's really mind-boggling, isn't it? Because it's so difficult to take in or embrace in our minds, which are so narrow and small, the concept of the eternity of life. However hard we put our minds to it, it's difficult to visualize the billions and billions and billions of lives that we have led and will lead in the future. That it's eternal and never ending. Goes on forever and ever. But nevertheless, through Renge, the law of cause and effect, we, without a shadow of doubt, made the cause to find the Gohonzon in this lifetime, in this particular planet. So that there can be no doubt And for that, we should feel most thankful. So Nichiren Daishonin says in this passage, common mortals in the latter day might well doubt the words of one Buddha only. That is to say, the words of Shakyamuni and his own words, which are quoted here. And then he goes on from there to bring in another Buddha, in the hope that that will make us believe even more. And the Buddha he brings in is the Buddha of the treasure tower in the Lotus Sutra, named Taho. So if you remember, or I'm afraid there's no time today to go into detail in the ceremony of the air, the ceremony of the treasure tower, but you may remember that this incredible treasure tower appears encrusted with gems, the gems being the good fortune that exists in life. And when the door of this great tower, like a huge golden spaceship, when the door opens, there is a Buddha sitting inside. This is Taho. And Shakyamuni, you remember, then gets into the treasure tower, like walking into the spaceship, and sits down next to Taho. And after a little while, under the banner of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, or rather Myoho Renge-kyo, the law of life, the Buddhas nod to each other and agree. So in some way, Taho is very important in this story. So the characters, Shakyamuni Buddha and Taho, actually represent the fusion of wisdom and reality. So Shakyamuni represents, in that allegory of the treasure tower, wisdom, one's own subjective wisdom, which lies latent, often, sadly, in our lives. And reality, the reality of life itself, is represented by Taho. So these two, bowing to each other and agreeing, represent what is known as Kyochi Myogo, the fusion of the object and subject, the fusion of subjective wisdom with objective reality. So what this is pointing out is another famous principle, which I'm sure most of you know, called Eshofuni, the inseparability of oneself and one's environment. The fact that whatever your life state will be reflected into your environment and will reflect back on you. If you're in the state of anger, it is anger that will reflect into the environment, and anger that will be reflected back from your environment to you. If you're in the state of Buddhahood, then it is Buddhahood that will reflect into the environment, though you can't actually see it. And Buddhahood that will come back to you from that environment. You can't see Buddhahood going out in vibrations. You can't see it coming back to you. But you get actual proof of it through the benefits that come to your life through practicing to the Gohonzon. You discover that your environment is now somehow working with you and not against you. And through that, you are gaining benefit and value and happiness in your life. So this is the function of Kyochi Myogo, the function of your subjective wisdom, which is your Buddha state, reflecting into the reality of life beyond, which is the objective reality. The Shakyamuni Buddha, that is you, in other words, your Buddha state, reacting with the Taho Buddha, which is your environment, the reality of the world in which you live. Amazing, isn't it? But we get proof of it. And that's what this particular passage is reminding Nanjo Tokimitsu and reminding us. That we get abundant actual proof through practicing to the Gohonzon. And reminding Nanjo Tokimitsu that you've also had that proof So in your extremity at this time when you're so ill, don't forget it and use your past actual proof to drive you forward to get more. So Tahoe Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions, which he also refers to, can also be termed or are representative of the 3 properties, or we more often call them the 3 attributes. Tahoe Buddha represents the attribute of the law of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which is working everywhere in the universe. Through linking our lives to it, we gain benefit from that harmony. Shakyamuni Buddha represents the property of wisdom, as I've already said, and the Buddhas of the 10 directions, or all the Buddhas in the universe, represent the property of action. These can be termed the 3 properties or the 3 attributes. And they're also expressed through 3 other terms. The property of the law, represented by Tahoe Buddha, is also called Hosshin, H-O-S-S-H-I-N, Hosshin, Hosshin. Okay? In other words, Hosshin, the attribute of the law, or the ultimate reality which exists around us, though often we can't see deeply enough to realize it. That ultimate reality being that the Gohonzon exists not only in the scroll that Nichiren Daishonin gave us, but also in the lives of every entity, every phenomenon that we see surrounding us. And the property or attribute of wisdom can be called Hoshin. It's a bit confusing, isn't it? H-O-1-S-H-I-N. First one was Hosshin. Second one is Hoshin. So Hoshin is the ultimate reality of life, which is Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, both within us and in our environment. Hoshin is the spiritual attributes which we have, in other words, the qualities of the Buddha state lying deep in our life: wisdom, compassion, courage, and so on. And then finally, the Buddhas of the 10 directions, or all the Buddhas of the universe, represent, as I said, action. And that is also termed Ojin, O-J-I-N, which is the physical manifestation of Buddhahood. Physical in the sense of action. Actual manifestation in daily life or in this world. So these 3 properties or 3 attributes are very important, because what this principle is saying is that these are the 3 attributes of all Buddhas. But also Nichiren Daishonin teaches that all of us have the potential to be Buddhas. Therefore, all of us can manifest the 3 attributes or 3 properties in our own lives. That is to say, we can manifest in the entity of our life Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, or the law, or Tahoe Buddha. We can manifest in our spiritual lives the wisdom, compassion, courage, and all the qualities of the Buddhas. And in the actuality of our physical appearance and actions, we can manifest the Buddha state as well. So those 3 attributes are in fact revealing Buddhahood in all its wonderful manifestation, both in the very heart of our lives, in its core and kernel, in our spiritual life, and in our physical life and actions. So every day in the 3rd prayer of Gongyo, you refer to these 3 attributes. as they apply to Nichiren Daishonin himself. In the third prayer, you silently offer gratitude to Nichiren Daishonin, the true Buddha of Honinmyo, who possesses the three enlightened attributes and the three virtues of parent, teacher, and sovereign. And then it goes on to say, his immense mercy transcends past, present, and future and leads all people to enlightenment.